The moment I understood that my marriage was over, I was standing in the parking lot of a grocery store on a Tuesday afternoon, holding my phone in one hand and a bag of apples in the other, reading a text message that was never meant for me to see. My name is Joel. I'm 38 years old, a structural engineer who spends his days calculating load tolerances and stress points in buildings, the invisible math that keeps things standing. I had been married to Diana for 9 years. We had a daughter named Lily, 7 years old, who collected erasers shaped like animals and kept them in a shoebox under her bed with the seriousness of someone managing a small museum. We lived in Ashford Falls, Ohio, in a house with a yellow door that Diana had painted herself the spring after we moved in, on a Saturday morning when Lily was still small enough to sit in a laundry basket on the porch and watch. The text on my phone was from a contact named Claire W. Diana didn't know anyone named Claire W. I was almost certain of that. But the message read, "I've been thinking about Cabo. About you. I can't make myself stop." The apples were cold through the bag. The parking lot smelled like rain that hadn't come yet. I stood there for what felt like a long time, reading those two sentences, and I understood, not with anger, not with grief, but with a specific, terrible clarity, that I was holding the answer to a question I hadn't fully known I was asking. It had started, as these things often do, with a vacation. 8 months before that parking lot, Diana and I had taken our first real vacation in 4 years. It was her idea, a week at a resort in Cabo San Lucas, the kind of place with swim-up bars and evening entertainment and staff who remembered your name by the second day. We'd been talking about going somewhere for years, and I had always found a reason to delay it. A project deadline, a budget recalculation, the vague promise of next summer that kept getting pushed another 12 months down the road. When Diana finally booked it herself in January, she didn't ask me. She showed me the confirmation email over dinner and said, "We're going in March. Lily's staying with your sister." I remember feeling a complicated mix of relief and mild guilt at her decisiveness. She was right to just do it. I never would have. We arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. The resort was everything the website had promised: terracotta tiles and bougainvillea, and the particular blue of the Pacific that you can't accurately remember afterward, only approximate. Lily's absence made the whole thing feel both liberating and slightly unmoored, the way a familiar room looks strange when you rearrange the furniture. Diana was different there, not in a way I could have named precisely at the time. Lighter, maybe. More present. She laughed at things easily, ordered drinks without checking the price, stayed up past 10 without mentioning that she was tired. I noticed it the way you notice good weather, pleasantly, without examining it too closely. We met Carter on our third evening. He was at the swim-up bar when we arrived for sunset drinks, early 40s, tanned in the way of someone who spent genuine time outdoors, with an easy manner that made him seem immediately familiar. He was traveling alone, he said, a delayed solo trip after a difficult year he didn't elaborate on. Diana asked about it with the kind of open curiosity she rarely deployed at home anymore, and Carter answered in a way that invited more questions, and within an hour the three of us were at a table with fresh drinks watching the sky go orange over the water. I liked him. That is the detail that still sits with me most uncomfortably. He was good company, interesting without being exhausting, attentive without being performative. He asked me about my work with what seemed like genuine interest, and I talked about stress tolerances and load-bearing calculations for longer than I usually permitted myself in social situations, and he listened. Diana laughed at something he said. One of those real laughs, sudden and uncalculated, and I felt, watching her, a quiet gladness that she was enjoying herself. I didn't ask the questions I should have been asking, not because I lacked the instinct, but because the instinct existed and I chose to file it under "you're being paranoid" and move on. That's the specific quality of my flaw. I am not a man who ignores friction by accident. I ignore it by decision, because the alternative is a conversation that costs something, and I have always been more comfortable paying the price later than paying it now. The 4 remaining evenings of the trip, Carter joined us for dinner twice and drinks once. Diana suggested it each time, lightly, naturally. Nothing happened that I witnessed. Nothing was said that landed wrong. They talked, they laughed, I was there, and I told myself the story I needed to tell. That this was simply what vacation looked like, 2 adults rediscovering how to be people outside of their routines. On our last morning, Diana hugged Carter goodbye on the terrace while I was loading bags into the shuttle. I watched it from a distance, a brief embrace, nothing remarkable, and I told myself I was seeing something that wasn't there. We flew home. Lily was ecstatic to see us. The yellow door was the same yellow. Life resumed, as life does, with the quiet insistence of a tide coming back in. The first thing I noticed, a week after we returned, was that Diana had started going to bed with her phone. It had always lived on the kitchen counter overnight, a habit she'd established when Lily was a baby so that nighttime noises wouldn't interrupt her sleep. The phone on the counter was so consistent a feature of our evenings that I could have included it in any description of the house. Now it was on her nightstand, face down, plugged into the charger she'd moved from the kitchen without comment. I noticed it. I said nothing. That was my first mistake, or perhaps more accurately, the first of a long series of small failures to ask what I already suspected. Looking back now, I understand that the phone on the nightstand was not a sign. It was a signal, a flag planted in open ground, perfectly visible to anyone willing to look. I looked. I chose not to see. Diana was also, in those weeks, more engaged at home than she had been in a long time. She cooked actual dinners instead of the assembled meals we'd settled into. Pasta from scratch one Tuesday, a slow-cooked stew on a Sunday that filled the house with rosemary. She initiated conversations about things she'd been reading, asked Lily elaborate questions about her school day, was present in the evenings in a way that felt new and slightly unfamiliar. I was grateful for it. I told myself the vacation had done what vacations are supposed to do. I was wrong, of course, but I want to be precise about the nature of the wrongness. The warmth was real. The engagement was genuine. She was not performing for my benefit. She was carrying something that was making her feel more alive, and some of that aliveness was spilling into everything around her, including me, including Lily, and none of us understood yet what we were actually living inside. Nate came over for dinner that month and made a comment afterward, when Diana had taken Lily upstairs for bath time and we were cleaning up the kitchen. "She seems good," he said. "Diana, like, energized or something." "Vacation," I said. He considered that, stacking plates. "Maybe," he said. I didn't ask what the maybe meant. In retrospect, it meant he saw something I was declining to see. Nate has always had a sharper social instinct than he lets on. He keeps it quiet, which makes it more accurate. It was a Thursday in May, 7 weeks after we returned from Cabo, when I first genuinely understood that something was wrong. Diana had gone to a work conference in Columbus for 2 days. She'd mentioned it 2 weeks earlier, a marketing summit, 2 nights in a hotel, back Friday evening. Standard professional travel, she did it twice a year. I had arranged for Lily to sleep at Pam's house Thursday night, handled the school pickup, done the whole domestic rotation without complaint. She called me Thursday evening from her hotel room. We talked for 20 minutes, about Lily, about a funny thing that had happened with a neighbor's dog, about nothing in particular. She sounded warm and easy. I told her I missed her. She said she missed me too. At 11:47 that night, my phone lit up on the nightstand. A text from Diana's number, clearly sent to the wrong person. "I'm in 412. Don't knock. Just use the key I left at the front desk." I stared at it for a full minute. Then I typed back, "Diana." This came to me. 3 minutes of silence. Then, "Oh God. I'm so sorry, wrong contact." That was for my colleague Sarah. "We're sharing some conference materials." I'm mortified, ignore it. I read it twice. The explanation was plausible. Sarah could be real. Conference materials could mean anything. The story was flawed but survivable. Not obviously impossible, just slightly off-center in a way that required a small act of faith to accept. I typed, "Okay, sleep well." I lay awake until 2 in the morning. The wrong contact explanation had the shape of a lie, but not the certainty of one. I had no proof of anything beyond a text message that could, if I squinted, be innocent. And yet something had changed. Some internal temperature had shifted in a way that didn't shift back. I understood that I had just made another choice at a fork in the road, and that the road I had chosen was the one that preserved the surface while the ground beneath it quietly gave way. She came home Friday evening and was affectionate and normal and brought Lily a small stuffed animal from the hotel gift shop and made pasta for dinner. I watched her and I looked for something, a tell, an asymmetry, the quality of a person performing rather than being, and I didn't find it. She was, as far as I could observe, simply Diana. That unsettled me more than a visible lie would have. The contact name surfaced in my mind over the following weeks like something floating to the top of dark water. She had texted a number she knew well enough to contact at midnight, from a hotel room, about a room key. The explanation required me to believe that a professional colleague had a room key to Diana's room for the purpose of exchanging conference materials just before midnight. I could believe that. People believe stranger things every day because stranger things are sometimes true. But I had stopped being a person who could file discomfort away without a trace. I started paying attention in a different way. Not surveillance, just attention. The kind of attention I should have been applying for months. Diana's phone had new patterns. She checked it more frequently, but the checking was never urgent. It was the checking of someone monitoring something specific, not the anxious checking of someone waiting for news. She kept it in her pocket during evenings now, even when she was cooking, which meant she'd feel any vibration before I could observe a screen lighting up. She mentioned Carter once. We were talking about the trip. Lily had found our Cabo photos on the tablet and wanted to look through them, and Diana said, almost offhandedly, "Remember that guy Carter? From the bar." And then she kept scrolling through the photos without looking at me. "Sure," I said. "He messaged me on Instagram," she said. "Just said he'd been back to Cabo." Kind of funny. The sentence was offered with the specific lightness of something preloaded, something she'd decided in advance how to deliver. I recognized the lightness immediately because I had used it myself on the occasions in my life when I was carrying something I didn't want someone else to see. "What did you say?" I asked. "Just that we'd had a good time," she said. "You know, polite." She handed the tablet to Lily, and the conversation ended. And I stood in the kitchen cataloging everything about the way she'd said just that we'd had a good time. The exact register of it, the practiced ease, and I understood, with the delayed clarity that had become the dominant mode of my thinking in recent weeks, that she had told me about Carter on Instagram because she needed there to be a version of the story that I had already heard. She was managing my future discovery. She was planting a version of the truth that would explain away what she knew I might eventually find. That realization arrived quietly. It didn't feel like rage. It felt more like a door closing. I am an engineer. I look at structures and I assess load. I look at what a thing is carrying and whether the design can sustain it. I applied the same logic to what I had in front of me. A wrong number text, a phone kept too close, a name mentioned too carefully, a contact on Instagram that had been disclosed just selectively enough to function as cover. The structure was not holding. I went through our phone plan records first, the carrier account we both accessed, billing records available online. Diana's number showed consistent calls to a number I didn't recognize, appearing first in March, the week after we returned from Cabo, and continuing through May at a frequency of 3 to 6 times per week. The calls were short, 8 to 12 minutes, clustered in the mid-afternoon window between 2 and 4, when I was typically in meetings and Lily was still in school. I ran the number through a reverse search. No result. A mobile number, prepaid or privacy protected. I created a secondary Gmail account and searched for Carter across every social media platform I could access. LinkedIn produced him within 4 minutes. Carter Voss, 43, owner of a landscaping and design company based in Scottsdale, Arizona. His Instagram was set to private. His LinkedIn photo matched the man I remembered from the resort. Same easy confidence, same outdoor quality to his appearance. I sat with his name for a long time. Then I went back to Diana's phone contacts. I didn't go through her messages. I told myself I wouldn't do that, and for a specific reason, not moral high ground, but precision. I wanted to know what I actually knew, rather than knowing everything and having to live with all of it at once. What I did was look at her contact list, which was visible from the home screen when she'd left her phone on the counter while she was upstairs with Lily. I scrolled until I found it. Claire W. The name was there, listed between 2 other contacts, preceded by a small circle icon. I pressed on the contact. It opened to a phone number. The phone number matched the number in our carrier's call records exactly. Claire W. was Carter Voss. I put the phone back on the counter exactly as I'd found it. Something cold settled in my chest that evening. Not the sharp cold of shock, but the flat cold of confirmation. I had been building a case in the hope that the case would fall apart. It hadn't fallen apart. It had assembled itself with the quiet logic of something that had always been true, waiting only for someone to pay the right kind of attention. That was when Nate called. I answered because I needed to hear a voice that wasn't inside my own head. I didn't plan to tell him anything. I told him everything within the first 10 minutes. He listened. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "What do you need right now?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "I just needed to say it out loud." "Okay," he said. "Say whatever you need to say. I'm not going anywhere." I had been holding the structure of my marriage up by sheer load-bearing will, and I hadn't known it until the moment I put it down. That is the thing about a well-built denial. It doesn't feel like denial from the inside. It feels like patience, like trust, like being the kind of person who doesn't catastrophize. It takes another voice, or a contact named Claire W., to show you what you've actually been doing. My sister Pam called 2 days later. She'd been watching Lily the previous weekend and had mentioned, afterward, that Lily had said something that stuck with her. "She told me Mommy talks on the phone a lot in the car," Pam said, carefully, not quite asking a question. "Yeah," I said. A pause. "Joel." "I know, Pam." Another pause. "Do you want me to?" "No," I said. "I've got it." I didn't want anyone to fix it or intervene or manage it for me. I wanted to sit across from Diana and put everything I knew on the table and watch what she did. Not out of cruelty, out of the specific respect that comes from having loved someone for 9 years. The belief that she deserved to face what she'd done in person, in full, rather than through a lawyer's letter or a door that was already closed when she came home. I spent a week deciding how to begin. I practiced the conversation in my head the way I calculate load tolerances, methodically, without sentiment, mapping every possible point of failure and preparing a response to each one. I knew that when I sat down across from her, I would need to be the calmest person in the room. Not because I wasn't in pain, because I was, and I needed the pain to be precise. The accidental exposure arrived before I had chosen my moment. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Diana had asked me to pick up a few things from the store on my way home. I had her phone because she'd left it in the car. She'd run back inside to get her wallet and asked me to grab the phone from the cup holder. The screen lit up with a notification while I was walking across the parking lot. "Claire W. I've been thinking about Cabo. About you. I can't make myself stop." I stood among the parked cars and read it. And I thought, this is how it ends. Not with the careful conversation I had planned. With a text message in a grocery store parking lot on a Tuesday in October. That's the thing about the truth. It doesn't wait for the right moment. It surfaces when it surfaces, and you simply have to be ready when it does. I bought the groceries. I drove home. Lily was at a birthday party until 6. I had 2 hours. Diana was in the kitchen when I walked in. I set the bags on the counter. I set her phone on the counter beside them, face up, with the notification still visible. I watched her see it. She went very still. Not the stillness of surprise. The stillness of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times and was now discovering that all the rehearsal was useless. "Sit down," I said quietly. "I want to hear it from you." She sat. She looked at the phone. She looked at me. And then she raised one hand, a small, controlled gesture, and said, "Let me tell you. All of it. But let me do it without you interrupting until I'm finished." Her voice was steady. That was not what I had expected, and the steadiness recalibrated something in me. She wasn't asking for a reprieve. She was asking for the chance to be honest without being interrupted, and I understood that the honesty she was offering was something she had been assembling for a long time. "Okay," I said. I sat down across from her. I laid my hands flat on the table, and she spoke. She looked at the window for a moment before she began. Then she looked at me. "It started the third night in Cabo. After dinner, when you went up to bed early. You had a headache, do you remember? I stayed at the bar for one more drink. Carter was still there. We talked for 2 hours. Just talked. That's the truth. Nothing happened that night. But something shifted in me that I didn't know how to explain then, and I'm still not entirely sure I can now. He asked me what I wanted. Not from the trip, not from the week, from my life. And I remember sitting there thinking that I didn't have a ready answer, and that I couldn't remember the last time anyone had asked me that question, including you. Including me. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like a justification. I'm not saying it to justify anything. I'm saying it because it's the true beginning, and you asked me to start at the beginning. When we got home, he messaged me on Instagram. I told you about that. I did tell you. That part was true, but what I didn't tell you was that I messaged him first. That same night we landed. I told myself it was just staying in touch, the way you do with interesting people you meet on vacation. I even told myself that telling you about the Instagram message made it not a secret, as if disclosure of the smaller thing canceled out the larger one. The first call was in March, a week after we got home. He called and we talked for an hour, and it felt, I'm going to be honest, even though this is going to hurt you, it felt like water, like something I'd been thirsty for. That's not a reflection on you, specifically. I think it was a reflection on who I'd become inside our life, inside this house. I had been so long without that feeling of being seen as a full person, not as a mother or a wife or a marketing manager, just as a person someone was curious about, that when I felt it, I didn't want to put it down. The first time I lied to you directly was the Columbus trip. Carter flew into Columbus. We had arranged it a week before I arranged it. I booked the conference, he booked a flight, and we stayed in the same hotel. That's what the room key text was. I knew the moment I sent it to you that I'd made a catastrophic mistake, and I made up the Sarah story in 3 minutes while lying in the dark. I knew you didn't fully believe it. I could hear it in your voice when you said okay. I told myself after Columbus that it had to stop, that I had already gone further than I could justify, and that the only way to not lose everything was to end it. I told Carter it was over. He said okay. We went 11 days without contact. And then one evening I was sitting in Lily's room after she went to sleep, looking at this drawing she'd made of our family. All 4 of us. She'd started drawing you taller than I am, which she thinks is accurate. And I felt nothing but guilt. Not grief. Not regret about Carter. Just pure guilt. And I remember thinking that guilt is not the same as love, and that I had been confusing the two for a long time. I called him the next morning. I can't tell you it was uncontrollable. I can't tell you I was swept away by something larger than myself. I made a decision, and then I made it again and again, every time I told myself it was the last time. The shame of it, the specific shame, is that I am good at my life. I am organized and competent, and I know how to manage things, and I managed this. I scheduled it. I was careful about it. And there is something uniquely terrible about that, about the coldness that required. I want you to know that I never stopped loving you. I know that doesn't help. I know it might make it worse. But the truth is that what happened with Carter was not about loving him more. It was about something in me that went looking for something it wasn't finding, and I made every wrong choice in how I handled that. I should have told you I was unhappy. I should have sat down across from this table and said I'm lost and let you respond. Instead, I made a decision in a hotel bar on the Pacific coast, and I followed that decision until it followed me home. She stopped. The kitchen was very quiet. I had not interrupted her. I had sat with my hands flat on the table, and I had listened to every word, and I had felt, beneath the listening, a series of small internal shifts, not anger, exactly, but the sensation of something large and load-bearing finally giving way, slowly and completely, without drama. How long? I asked. 7 months, she said. Is it over? She hesitated, 1/2 second, before she said, yes. The hesitation was honest. I almost respected it. I need to think, I said. I need some time before I know what I want to do. She nodded. She looked like someone who had just set down something very heavy and was not sure yet whether the setting down had helped or made things worse. I'm going to pick up Lily, I said. I stood up. I took my keys from the counter. I walked out of the kitchen and through the yellow door and got into my car, and I sat in the driveway for a moment before I put it in reverse. Inside the house, Diana had not moved from her chair. I tried for 3 weeks. Not because I was certain it was the right decision, because I believed it was the right attempt. 9 years is not nothing. Lily was 7. Diana had been honest with me in a way that cost her something, and honesty, even the late kind, deserves to be met with an honest effort. We went to 2 sessions with a couples therapist. Diana went alone to a 3rd. I went alone to a 4th, and sat in a chair across from a calm woman named Dr. Reyes who asked me, in the 2nd session, what I was most afraid of. I thought about it carefully before I answered. I'm most afraid, I said, that I'll forgive her and rebuild something that looks like what we had before and feel, 5 years from now, like I've been living in a replica. Dr. Reyes wrote something down. That's a very specific fear, she said. I'm a structural engineer, I said. Replicas fail in different places than originals. She looked at me for a moment. Do you think what you had before was worth preserving? And that was the question. Not whether Diana was worth forgiving. She was, I believe that, I still do. Not whether the marriage had been real. It had been, for years, genuinely real. But whether the thing I was being asked to rebuild was something I wanted to live inside, or something I would maintain out of fear and habit and the particular cowardice of a man who has always preferred to avoid the conversation that costs something. I drove home from that session, and I sat in the car outside the yellow door for 20 minutes. Then I went inside, and I told Diana. I can't do this, I said. Not because I don't love you. Because I understand now that there are some things that love doesn't actually fix, and I've spent my whole life pretending otherwise. She didn't argue. She looked at me with the expression of someone who had already known this was coming and had been sitting with it for days. Okay, she said. I want us to be good at this, I said. For Lily. Whatever else happens, I want us to be good at this part. Me too, she said. And she meant it. I could tell the difference by then. The divorce took 6 months. We were not cruel to each other. We were careful, and sometimes sad, and occasionally kind in ways that were more difficult than fighting would have been. Diana moved into an apartment 12 minutes away. We split the week with Lily using a schedule that Lily herself had input on, in her extremely decisive 7-year-old way. Nate helped me move furniture on a Saturday in December. We worked mostly in silence, the good silence of old friends, and at the end of the day we sat on the floor of my new living room with 2 beers and no furniture yet, and he said, "You okay?" "Getting there," I said. "That's the honest answer," he said. Pam brought Lily over for the first overnight at my new place, and Lily walked through every room with her hands clasped behind her back like she was assessing a property, which she had clearly absorbed from watching me do exactly that. She approved of the guest room, which would become her room. She asked if she could paint the door. "What color?" I said. She thought about it with absolute seriousness. "Orange," she said, "like a sunset." We painted it orange the following Saturday. It dried unevenly and was slightly more neon than either of us had intended, and Lily declared it perfect. I stood back and looked at it for a moment. Something in me, something that had been holding its breath for a long time, quietly exhaled. I didn't look for anyone new that year. I wasn't ready, and I knew I wasn't ready, which I counted as a form of progress. What I did instead was learn what my evenings looked like without the weight of an unspoken thing pressing down on them. Lighter than I'd expected. Quieter. Not empty. Something closer to the feeling of a room after furniture you'd stopped noticing has finally been moved. Diana called me in the spring, not about Lily, just to talk. We talked for 40 minutes about nothing in particular, and it was, somehow, easier than many of the conversations we'd had in the last years of the marriage. She sounded different. I didn't ask how Carter was. I didn't need to know. She mentioned, near the end, that she'd started seeing a therapist regularly. "I'm trying to understand," she said, "what I was actually looking for." "You know, I think so," I said. "I'm sorry, Joel. I know I said it before, but I mean it differently now. I understand more of what I actually did." I believed her. That was the thing that surprised me most about where I'd landed. Not the anger I'd expected to carry, but the absence of it. What I had instead was something more like clarity, a clean understanding of what had happened, what I'd contributed to it, and what I was no longer willing to build a life around. "I know," I said. "Take care of yourself." The orange door at my apartment catches the morning light in a way that makes it look, for about 20 minutes around 8 o'clock, genuinely like a sunset. Lily noticed this the first time she stayed over, standing in the hallway in her pajamas, looking at it with the quiet attention of someone encountering something worth remembering. "It really does look like a sunset," she said. "You picked it," I said. She considered this with deep satisfaction. Then she went to get cereal, and I stood in the hallway for another moment, looking at the orange light on an orange door, and I thought, yes, this is where I start. There is a particular kind of loneliness that lives inside a functioning marriage, quiet enough to ignore for years, loud enough that it eventually finds a way out. Diana did not fall into an affair because she was careless or cruel. She fell into one because she had spent years disappearing inside the roles of wife and mother and professional. And when Carter asked her one simple question on a resort terrace, "What do you want from your life?" she discovered that she didn't have an answer ready. That absence of an answer was the real beginning of everything that followed. Not the attraction, not the opportunity, not the geography of a hotel in Cabo. The beginning was a woman who had stopped asking herself that question and met someone who asked it for her. Joel's contribution to the collapse is quieter but equally real. He is a man who calculates structural tolerance for a living, and yet he consistently declined to apply that same precision to the architecture of his marriage. Not because he was unaware. He noticed the phone on the nightstand, heard the wrong number text, registered the careful way Diana said Carter's name. He noticed every signal. He chose, repeatedly and deliberately, to file each one under a category labeled "not yet." That is not passivity. That is a specific decision made by a specific kind of person. Someone who believes that peace maintained is better than a conversation survived, even when the peace is only cosmetic. The accidental exposure, Carter's text arriving on Joel's phone in a grocery store parking lot, is the kind of irony that feels almost designed. Joel had been methodically assembling evidence for weeks, preparing the careful conversation he would eventually initiate on his own terms. Instead, the truth announced itself without permission, on a Tuesday afternoon, over apples. That randomness matters. It means the confrontation Joel planned so precisely was never his to control, and that the outcome was always going to be determined less by preparation than by who he was in the moment the door opened. What the therapy sessions reveal, particularly the exchange with Dr. Reyes, is that Joel's deepest fear was not losing Diana, but losing himself inside the process of rebuilding. The replica metaphor is telling. He understands, from professional experience, that a structural copy is not the same as the original. It holds differently. It fails in different places. He refused to live inside a replica of what he'd already had, and that refusal, however painful, is the most honest thing he does in the story. Diana's confession monologue is the most psychologically complex moment in the story, and it deserves attention precisely because of what she does not say alongside what she does. She admits the decision-making, the scheduling, the coldness of how managed the whole thing was. But she also identifies the thing underneath it, the loss of herself, the specific hunger for being known as a full person, and she names it without using it as an excuse. That distinction is important. Explaining is not justifying. She doesn't ask him to absolve her. She asks him to understand, which is a different request, and one he ultimately can honor even as he chooses to leave. What this story actually traces is not a betrayal, but an accumulation. Years of conversations not started, needs not named, discomfort consistently deferred. Both of them built the same architecture, one of surface stability over structural uncertainty, and both of them paid for it when it finally gave way. Joel perhaps paid more, because he saw the cracks and chose not to address them. Diana paid differently, because she addressed them in the worst possible way and then had to watch what that cost everyone she loved. The orange door at the end is not a triumphant image. It is a quiet one, a 7-year-old's choice, slightly neon, badly applied, exactly right. It belongs to a man learning what it means to start without knowing yet where he's going. That, more than any resolution, feels true. What I keep coming back to, thinking about Joel and Diana, is how much of this was built in silence. Not secrets, silence. The kind that accumulates between two people who care about each other and still somehow stop asking the difficult questions. He stopped pushing. She stopped saying. And in the space that opened up between them, something else moved in. We talk a lot about betrayal as a dramatic event, a moment, a decision, a line crossed. But the stories that actually hurt aren't usually about that moment. They're about the long, quiet time before it. The unasked questions. The conversations deferred one more evening. The door you didn't knock on because you were afraid of what was on the other side. If there's anything to take from this, it's not a warning. It's a reminder. Ask the question. Say the thing. The conversation you're avoiding costs more the longer you wait.